If you're an executive of a pro football team, this is just about the last guy you want to see.
What's up, guys?
It's been said that when ESPN reporter Sal Paolantonio shows up, there must be bad news. When there's controversy in the NFL, Sal's usually the one telling us about it.
Good morning, Sal.
Good morning, everybody. Coming up on SportsCenter, I'll have this story of why Eli Manning thinks he's really going to miss Plexico Burress. Okay.
How many interviews do you think that you've done over your career as a reporter and a writer?
Thousands and thousands and thousands of interviews.
Of all of those, who is the toughest coach to interview?
Bill Belichick, hands down. Bill Belichick is the toughest person I've ever interviewed. And I covered the famine in Africa for the Albany Times-Union. I was invited to the palace of Colonel Mengistu, the former dictator of Ethiopia. And he gave us more answers than Bill Belichick sometimes does.
Sal was a political reporter before he was a sports reporter. So when ESPN landed an audience with Sarah Palin this fall, Sal's the guy they sent to do the interview.
Do you remember the nickname that you had?
It was Barracuda.
What was it?
It was Barracuda.
Now, why did you get that nickname?
Clearly, this is a man who knows how to ask a question.
You might listen to an interview at home, and you'll go, ask the question, right? Get to the point. We're interested in their information and their emotions. No one cares what I know.
Actually, they do. How Football Explains America. Sal's new book, How Football Explains America, is a bestseller. For once, he's answering the big questions rather than asking them.
I've read a whole lot of history books about the NFL and about football in general, and I was always struck that none of those books ever answered the central questions of how and why the game was created and how and why it became our national obsession. We were a European colony. And like all the other European colonies, we were bequeathed the games of soccer and rugby from England and Wales. And yet, we got rid of those games. Why did that happen? When did it happen? How did it happen? Fascinated me.
His fascination wasn't ready for Amazon.com until the climax of Super Bowl 42, which he didn't even see.
I missed Tyree's catch. Couldn't see it, because we were stuck behind the security guards waiting to go out and interview the very players who are now performing these very dramatic and heroic acts on the field.
Which you weren't seeing.
Which I was not seeing.
It was about the time Plexico Burress caught the game-winning touchdown that Sal realized what he was missing.
It dawns on me that I'm not seeing the story that I need to cover, and now I realize what the game means to the fan and what the story means to the game. I needed that fix. You know, what was the story? I missed the story, and that to me was the essence of the game.
The crux of Sal's theory is that rugby and soccer just weren't the kind of games Americans could grab hold of. We needed a game that told a different kind of story.
Walter Camp, Park Davis, Amos Alonzo Stagg, all the founding fathers of American football all write about the fact that soccer and rugby were unsatisfying to the American competitor and the American spectator because they were mass motion, and they tried to come up with ways to make the game more organized, controlled, and scientific.
Football was just a primitive mess until a couple of rules changes laid the groundwork for its transformation into America's game.
Now, here's an American idea, Steve, that Walter Camp had. One individual on the field slightly above the rest. It took a lot of time for the quarterback position to evolve into the natural hero protagonist. But they had the foresight to see that the quarterback position could grow up into this great mythological figure of sports.
But the rule that gave us John Elway was not the most significant one. After all, there's no helicopter play unless there's a first down to dive for.
The change of rule in 1882 to create the first down, I think, is the biggest rule change of any rule change in any sport. Now you could tell the story in the game that you would march down the field with the hero, and he would be arrayed against forces both man-made and by nature. There was a storyline that had a natural dramatic arc based on that particular change in the rule.
You talk about a painting by John Gast, 1872, called American Progress. Why is that painting so important in explaining why football is an expression of our culture and our society?
Well, if you look at that painting, it is a visual explanation of manifest destiny, the idea that America had the destiny that was given to it by God, that, you know, we would advance across the continent to our liking. And if you look at that painting, you have the imagery of angels and God. You have the imagery of learning. The angel is carrying a book, and that nothing will stop this march across the continent. So you had a football game that now goes across the field, mirrors American society.
It's the acquisition of territory.
Acquisition of territory. Capture territory, hold it, defend it. That's what we were doing in our country. And that's why the game, I think, subconsciously caught on to Americans.
Sal's book documents much of the game's evolution, from the impact of the '58 championship game, which Sal thinks is overrated, to the '60s of Lombardi and Namath. My favorite chapter is the one that starts at West Point.
I have a chapter in this book, Steve, called, and I wanted to call this book From MacArthur to Mangini. That was my original subtitle. There's a direct DNA linkage when you think about it, from General Douglas MacArthur to Eric Mangini.
Just reload.
MacArthur hired Blake to become his head coach. And, of course, Red Blake forged those great Army teams of the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s.
And Lombardi, of course, was an assistant coach at West Point under Red Blake.
Blake hired Vince Lombardi. Vince Lombardi coached Mickey Corcoran at St. Cecilia High School. Mickey Corcoran was Bill Parcells' basketball coach. Parcells goes back to West Point, learns all the tenets of the West Point coaching philosophy: field position, discipline.
Tell that undisciplined center we got to get his head out of his.
Parcells hires Belichick, who also has his dad, Steve, at the Naval Academy. And Belichick, of course, hires Eric Mangini, and Mangini goes off the reservation and gets hired by the New York Jets.
It was Belichick's Patriots who finally provided the inspiration for Sal to write the book he'd been thinking about for years. The entire 2007 season is woven through the book as a thread. Why?
It was really the perfect storm. The idea that you had the perfect team, the New England Patriots, that you had Tom Brady, the perfect hero, that you had Eli Manning, a young upstart, and of course, who is Bill Belichick? He's the evil Lord Sith in the hoodie.
2007 didn't give us the perfect team, but it did give us the perfect story. The kind of story America can't get enough of. And you were in the tunnel when it happened.
And I was in the tunnel and I didn't see any of it. And so I decided to, write about it in a way that sort of put it all together.